I'm a scientist, a cyclist, and a very much beginner runner, but today I'll give you my scientific review of the Garmin Forerunner 970, and we'll find out how good the actual measurements are of this device. As regular viewers will know, my focus is always on data quality, so today we're gonna find out if the Garmin Forerunner 970 is worth it in terms of heart rate measurements, GPS tracking, and recovery or sleep tracking. And in addition, I'll also give you my subjective opinion of the Garmin Forerunner 970 and how it compares to other Garmins in the Forerunner lineup and other lineups, and also to other devices out there. So let's go back to the studio because I just finished my 5K. I need to stretch a bit and then we'll get into the data. Okay, back in the studio and we're stretching. Just to quickly clarify, when I say scientific testing, what I basically mean is systematically doing the same test on every device with the same kind of workouts to see which has the best heart rate tracking, but the same goes for GPS tracking. Do the same ride several times and seeing which device has the most consistent GPS tracks, or for the sleep staging, comparing it against a scientific EEG device that can actually measure your brainwaves. And I do the same test on all devices, so you can see if the data quality of a device is good enough for you. And for the Forerunner 970, since it's such a popular device, I actually just didn't do the tests on me, but also some of the tests on my colleague Raphael, to have a second independent person testing it. Now, in addition, at the end of the video, I'll also discuss some of the features of the Garmin Forerunner 970, if it's worth the price compared to other Garmin models, and also what my general experience has been and Raphael's experience. So let me finish stretching and then we'll take a look at the data. So we're here at my computer now. We're going to take a look at the actual data. And as always, we'll start with one of the easiest exercises for a device to track, which is indoor cycling. Now, you might be more interested in the running results, but we're going to start with the easiest exercise and slowly move to the harder exercises to see where the performance from the Garmin Forerunner 970 breaks down, if at all. And in this overview right here, we're comparing the Garmin Forerunner 970, which is along the vertical axis, to the Polar H10 ECG chest strap, which is along the horizontal axis. Now, the Polar H10 can measure my heart rate really accurately because it's an ECG chest strap, which actually measures the electrical activity of the heart, which is one of the most reliable ways of measuring heart rate. You can find a link to that in the description below. And we can see that overall the performance is pretty okay, especially here in the higher heart rate range. Almost all points are on or close to the blue line, meaning that the performance is very good. And the more points are away from the blue line, the worse is the performance. And interestingly, in sort of the lower to medium heart rate range, there are some points above and below the blue line, indicating that at least in some moments, the Garmin Forerunner 970 didn't detect my heart rate accurately. The correlation, this R value up here, is 0.93, which is okay, but also not great. Now, the maximum correlation is 1.00, so 0.93 is okay-ish. But let's take a look at the individual spinning sessions to see what's going on here. And here we have the first example interval spinning session with the reference in blue-green and the Forerunner 970 in red. And generally the agreement is actually pretty good. So in the beginning, it struggled a little bit. So here in the very beginning, it detected a slightly too low heart rate. And then at these dips in my heart rate during the first two intervals, it didn't fully detect my heart rate accurately. But overall, good enough, I would say. This second session is also pretty good. You can see I did a lot of short intervals, both at high intensity and somewhat lower intensity. And it generally did very well. And this third session also looks really good. Only in the lower heart rate ranges there's some deviation, which is why it sometimes detected a too high and sometimes too low heart rate. But overall, I would say this would be good enough. But just to put that correlation value into perspective, let's compare it to many of the other devices I've tested in the past. And that's displayed in this overview right here with the Forerunner 970 marked in red. And the further to the top right the device is, the better is its agreement with the reference device. So we have that correlation value here along the horizontal axis. And as you can see, the Forerunner 970 is actually performing about the same as the Forerunner 165. But let's zoom in a little bit so we can read those labels better. And that zoomed in view is displayed right here. So these are just the devices with a correlation of 0.9 or higher. And as you can see, the performance of the Forerunner 970 is about the same as the performance of the Forerunner 965, so the previous generation, but also the much cheaper Forerunner 165. So honestly, about the performance I would expect, based on those individual sessions, I would definitely say it's good enough. but some of the details are lost. So as you can see, the best performers in this overview are different Apple Watches, for instance, but also the Pixel Watch 3 and some Huawei devices. Those are really the top performers. Also, for instance, the Whoop strap is doing quite okay, though there are definitely better devices like the Apple Watch out there. Overall though, still an adequate performance for indoor cycling of the Garmin Forerunner 970. But let's now take a look at what most of you have been waiting for, running. And that overview for running is displayed right here. So similar to before, we want those points to be as close to the blue line as possible. And this actually looks really good. The correlation is quite high at 0.98 and most points are on or at least close to the blue line. So really looking good. Though there were a few moments where the points are below the blue line, indicating that at least sometimes the Forerunner 970 detected a too low heart rate. But here I really want to take a look at the individual runs. And here we have the first run that I did, and this is almost perfect. There was a slight delay in the beginning and picking up on my increase in heart rate, but otherwise nothing to complain about. This second run also looks really good, almost perfect overlap, only some of the details are imperfect, so right here and right here. Those dips and peaks weren't perfectly detected, but honestly this wouldn't change anything about how I use the data. Also this session right here is almost perfect, though here we have the first interval where it struggled a little bit. So this is probably where most of that deviation came from. Still nothing really worrisome. And also this session right here looks really good. So overall, also for running, a really good performance, but let's see how this compares to the competition. And we can see that in this overview right here. Again, we want the devices to be as far to the top right as possible, and the Forerunner 970 is marked in red right here. And again, this looks quite good. We can see it's among some of the better devices, though not the absolute best devices. But let's zoom in a bit again. And that zoomed in view is displayed right here. So these are just the devices with a correlation of 0.9 or higher. And as you can see, the Forerunner 970 is actually quite close again to the Forerunner 165. This is actually a much cheaper Garmin Forerunner watch, but it has similar performance to the 970. And also the Venue 3, for instance, isn't that far away from the 970, which has the same sensor actually. So overall, pretty good performance. Only some Apple Watches and some Huawei devices are doing significantly better, but otherwise not much to complain about. If you're a runner and you get similar performance to me at least, the 970 is a pretty good heart rate tracker. And next, let's make things a lot more difficult by looking at one of the hardest exercises for a device to track outdoor cycling. But first, if you're into running, which I think you might be given that you're watching this review on the Garmin Forerunner 970, you might be interested in getting some of the best running plans and live coaching out there. And in my opinion, the best app I've ever used for that is the Runner app. Now I have an affiliate link for Runner in the description below. Runner gives live guidance during your runs and provides running plans, whether you're trying for a 5K, 10K, half marathon or marathon. If you want a structured running plan that's personalized to you, I really recommend the Runner app. You can find that affiliate link up here or down here. I use it myself every week. Or if you want to track your glucose levels and find out which foods cause big spikes, thereby potentially affecting your energy levels, I would recommend the Levels app. I track both my food and my glucose levels using a continuous glucose monitor with the Levels app. It's really my favorite app for that purpose. There's also an affiliate link for that up here or down here. Or if you want to support the channel in some other way, liking and subscribing already really helps. Or if you want to more directly support the channel financially, I have channel memberships, which gives you early access to some of my videos, and you can find that linked up here or down here as well. And there's also a general Amazon affiliate link, so if you buy anything on Amazon but first click my link, you'll also give me a small commission there without it costing you any extra, and you can help me, for instance, pay my editor Alex. But back to the testing, and let's see how the Garmin Forerunner 970 performs for outdoor cycling. And those results are displayed right here. Again, we want the points to be as close to the blue line as possible. And interestingly, in the higher heart rate range, most points are on or close to the blue line. But in the lower to medium heart rate range, there's quite some points below it, especially some above it as well, but especially here below it. The correlation is still pretty okay at 0.89, but I've seen better devices for this. Let's now take a look at some of the individual bike rides to see how big this problem is, because as we also saw for spinning, sometimes the correlation doesn't tell the full story. So here we have the first bike ride I did with the Garmin Forerunner 970, and this looks okay, though there are definitely some artifacts here or some problems. So for instance, in this first part of the ride, the Garmin Forerunner 970 detected a way too low heart rate, and that also happened right here in this section. This second longer ride actually looks pretty okay. Here it followed along quite well with my heart rate. This third ride again in moments has a too low heart rate in the middle here and also here near the end. This bike ride shows similar issues, so sort of a delay in picking up on an increase in heart rate sometimes. That appears to be the main issue also right here, delay in picking up on a decrease. So if there's quick changes, it needs some time to adapt to those changes, but it gets there in the end. We see something similar right here, also right here. And in the longer runs, it at least appears better, though of course we're missing some of those details because the timeline is much more compressed. You can also see that right here, there's some deviation. So there are definitely better devices, and I can actually prove that to you by comparing the performance of the Garmin Forerunner 970 against those other devices. And that is displayed in this overview right here. So again, the further to the top right, the better the correlation with the reference device. And the Forerunner 970 is marked in red right here, which means it's sort of in the second, maybe third tier of devices. So definitely not bad, but there's just better choices out there. Again, let's zoom in a bit so we can read those labels better. And that zoomed in view is displayed right here. So these are just the watches with a correlation of 0.8 or higher. And the Forerunner 970 right here is among some of the better Garmin devices, but it is not that far from some of these Garmin devices, like the Instinct 2, the Enduro 3. We also have the Instinct 3 right here, and then the Forerunner 970 is a little bit higher. Now the main difference between, for instance, the Enduro 3 on the bottom right here and the 970 a bit higher is that the Garmin Forerunner 970 is just a lot lighter than the Garmin Enduro 3, which probably means it's more stable on the wrist, thereby providing better heart rate tracking during cycling. So that's something to remember. Even if watches have the same sensor, that doesn't mean that the exact performance will be the same. It's actually the best Garmin I think I've tested recently, but as is pretty clear, there are definitely still better devices out there. Some of the best devices at the moment are different Apple Watches, the Pixel Watch 3, and some Huawei devices, similar to what we saw for some other testing as well. So again, it might be acceptable for most of you, but it's definitely not as good as I'd hoped. But let's now take a look at how it actually did on Raphael, because watches tend to do a bit better on Raphael. For some reason, my physiology or way of training tends to be a bit harder for watches to keep tracking my heart rate, whereas on Raphael it's a bit easier. So let's see how it did on him for cycling. And for Raphael, the results actually appear to be pretty good, or at least better than for me. He has a correlation of 0.97 for biking outside, and most points are a bit closer to the blue line. So this actually looks pretty good. But here I would really be interested in those individual bike rides. So here we have Raphael's first bike ride, which looks pretty good. There are some minor deviations like right here, but overall the general patterns match pretty well. Second bike ride also looking good. Third one, it's mostly the details that get lost. So those quick drops in heart rate just aren't detected by the Forerunner, but otherwise more or less consistent. Here he had a sudden drop in heart rate, and it seems like the Forerunner lost the signal for a while and also detected a too high heart rate, but generally looking pretty good. Yes, some minor deviations, so it's not quite as good as some other devices out there, but pretty decent. But let's take a look at some of the competition. So this is a similar overview as we had for me, but now for Raphael. And here the Forerunner 970 is doing pretty well. As for me, the Pixel Watch 3 and Apple Watch 10 are clearly outperforming it, but otherwise it's doing about the same as, for instance, the Coral Space Pro, which is arguably the competitor from Corals for the Garmin Forerunner 970, and about the same as, for instance, the Huawei Watch 5 did on Raphael, and a lot better than the Enduro 3 did on Raphael as well. So the same sensor again, but just much more weight, probably moving it a lot more on his wrist. So similar patterns to what we saw on me. Pretty decent though imperfect performance for the Forerunner 970. To close off, let's take a look at the hardest exercise for a device to track weightlifting. And here we have the results for weightlifting, but now for me again, and the correlation is not great at 0.79, so roughly 0.8. This is definitely not good enough to track your heart rate during weightlifting, and as expected, quite often the Forerunner detects a too low heart rate. We've seen this for many devices, especially in the higher heart rate range. It detected too low heart rate because the minute I start a set of exercises, my heart rate increases and it isn't able to detect that peak because there's so much tension on my arm when I'm holding the weight. Now, I'm actually not going to bother taking a look at the individual sessions or that overview because based on this, we fully know what to expect. Not all those peaks in heart rate are detected. So if you're interested in tracking your heart rate during weightlifting, only so far the Apple Watch has been good enough, but it also has its limitation where it sometimes stops detecting your heart rate for a bit. So if you really care about your heart rate during weightlifting, which many people don't really care about, but if you do, just get yourself an ECG chest strap. And you can connect it to your Garmin Forerunner if you want, so it's easy to connect, and that way you will get accurate heart rate tracking during all your activities. So those were the results for heart rate tracking, but of course there's more to a device like the Forerunner 970 than just heart rate tracking. It can do a lot more. It has things like your body battery, and it also tracks your sleep stages. Now, a lot of people actually use their sleep stages, maybe their total amount of deep sleep, to get some information on their recovery. But how reliable is the sleep stage tracking? Well, that's what we're gonna test now. I actually compared the sleep stage tracking of the Garmin Forerunner 970 against the Z-Max EEG headband, which is an EEG device that can actually measure my brain waves and was specifically designed for sleep stage tracking. Now, it's also imperfect, but it's good enough to give us general impressions of which devices are good at sleep stage tracking and which aren't quite as good. Now, in most cases, all devices from a manufacturer tend to use the same sleep stage tracking algorithm, because in contrast to heart rate tracking, for instance, where both the hardware of the sensor and the firmware are about equally important, I would say, for sleep stage tracking, the firmware is much more important than the actual sensor. Most sensors out there for several years have been good enough to track your heart rate, movement and other things during the night. Because there's so little movement going on, measuring heart rate is actually quite easy, and also measuring things like heart rate variability. But what the harder thing is translating all those things to sleep stages. Because normally sleep stages in the lab aren't tracked using things like heart rate or movement. You measure all those different brain waves and eye movements and some other muscle movements, and you use those to determine deep sleep, light sleep, REM sleep, well, actually slightly more complicated sleep stages, but basically those. So what a smartwatch or sports watch like the Garmin Forerunner 970 has to do is use other metrics like your heart rate to estimate those sleep stages. And that means collecting both a lot of data with the scientific reference and a lot of data with the smartwatch, and training an AI or sort of machine learning model to translate those things like heart rate and movement to sleep stages. And so far, for all previous Garmin models I tested, the sleep stage tracking just wasn't very good compared to some of the best devices out there, because Garmin probably uses the same sleep staging among all their devices, because training it is just so expensive, so you're not going to develop a new one for each device. But I actually tested this so we can find out. Let's head back to my computer and take a look at the sleep stage tracking results. And right here we have the sleep tracking results, with on the top the sleep stages as measured by the Z-Max EEG headband, so the reference, and on the left the sleep stages as recorded by the Forerunner 970. And each column right here is normalized to 100%, meaning that we can see what percentage of the sleep stages according to the reference device is predicted as the sleep stage by the Garmin Forerunner 970. Now, first looking at deep sleep, the agreement is okay, I would say. About 70% of what was deep sleep according to the reference was also marked as deep sleep by the Forerunner 970, so pretty okay. And about 20% was predicted as being light sleep instead. Light sleep agreement is also pretty good at about 69%, but quite a bit of extra deep sleep was actually detected. Because we have more light sleep, this 18% here actually weighs quite a bit higher, meaning that quite a bit of extra deep sleep was detected. And REM sleep agreement is by far the worst. Only about 40% of what the reference said was REM sleep was also predicted as REM sleep by the Garmin Forerunner 970, and more of it was instead predicted as light sleep. And this is actually what we typically see for Garmin devices. They're just not as good at REM sleep detection. Many devices struggle with this, and Garmin is no exception. But we can actually compare these results to the performance of many other devices out there. So let's take a look at that. And those results are in this overview right here, with the average agreement over those three sleep stages along the horizontal axis, and the agreement of the worst of those three along the vertical axis. That basically means that the further to the top right the device is, the better is its agreement with the reference device. And the Garmin Forerunner 970 is marked here in the middle. So these different colors are actually different reference devices, and the green one is the one we used in this video. And you can actually see that the Forerunner 970 isn't that far from the Enduro 3, the Vivo Active 5, the Instinct 3. Let's see if we have some other Garmin devices as well. We have, for instance, the Forerunner 165, the Phoenix 8. All of these are super close to each other. This to me indicates that they all have the same sleep stage tracking performance and likely the same sleep stage tracking algorithm. And it's not the absolute worst out there. About half of the devices is doing worse than Garmin devices, but also about half of them is doing better, and some of them are doing a lot better. Now, the 4 best brands out there at the moment are 8 Sleep, Apple, we also have the Nuqua or Sleep 2 app, and the Oura Ring. These are the 4 best ones. Now, the 8 Sleep Pod is actually a thing that goes around your mattress that actively cools and heats each side of the bed. It's my favorite sleep improvement device, especially in summer. It cools me down so much and actually allows me to sleep on those hot summer nights. And you can do it for each side of the bed independently, so that's great if you have a partner. But it's really expensive, so only get it if you can truly afford it. If you want the best discount possible and want to support the channel, there's an affiliate link for it up here and also down here. Now, in addition to cooling and heating the bed, it actively tracks all of your metrics without wearing anything on your body, which is what some people prefer. But if you don't mind wearing anything and you don't want that cooling or heating functionality, an Apple Watch is quite a bit cheaper and does a really good job as well. The same goes for the Sleep 2 app and the Oura Ring right here. And slightly worse than these devices, but still pretty good, are different Fitbit and Google devices, which can be quite a bit cheaper, and also the Whoop strap. And Garmin devices are definitely doing worse. I actually made a video about the different brands according to scientific literature, and you can find that link below as well. But let's now take a look at one of the strongest points, at least normally for Garmin, which is their GPS tracking performance. And the way I test the GPS tracking performance is by cycling the same route several times. And if the GPS tracks overlap very well, it's very likely that the GPS tracking performance is pretty good. And if they're deviating a lot from each other, then it's much more likely that the GPS tracking performance isn't very good. Now, I had the GPS settings of the Forerunner 970 set to the most accurate and most battery intensive mode, which I think is all systems plus multiband. So we're looking at the best possible performance of the Garmin Forerunner 970. Now, I always start my ride on the corner right here. So the first thing we want to look at is how quickly the signal was acquired. And as you can see, in almost all cases, the signal was acquired almost instantly and quite accurately. So that's already a good sign. But let's now take a look at the consistency between the signals. And this is also looking pretty good. There's a little bit of deviation here in the beginning, but overall, this is better than most devices out there. And here it's actually super consistent. So I'm really happy with that. If we go along the route, it's still looking super good. Nothing to complain about. A tiny bit of deviation, but still really good. Here also looking super good. Here one signal is deviating a bit, but otherwise not much to complain about. Here it's super accurate. Also here looking really good. Then going along the route, nothing to complain about so far. This is really some of the best performance I've ever seen. Really looking good. Here there's one moment with a bit of deviation for some reason. Otherwise looking really good. So this is honestly usually as good as it gets. So based on this so far, I can really recommend the Garmin 970 for GPS tracking. But let's also take a look at the way back from work. So here we can see the results for 7 times I cycled back from work, where one time I actually did start on the other side of the building. But again, the signal is acquired almost instantly. So really good. And then if we go along the route, we do see a little bit of deviation here in the beginning, but nothing major. Really looking quite good, quite consistent. Yes, there is some deviation, but you're not going to get much better results than this. Still looking quite good with a bit of deviation down here, but still as good as it gets. Here we do have a little bit of deviation. This is not quite as good as I would have hoped. So one moment with a bit more deviation, but then the moment I went about the roundabout, it's again really good. Also here, there's just one moment of deviation, but this is actually true deviation. There was some construction down here, so I couldn't always take the exact same route. So this we should ignore because I actually had to walk through some parts of buildings. So we're going to ignore everything until we get here. And here it again looks really good. Now there is some deviation here, so this is a bit more imperfect. But still, compared to much of the competition, this is some of the best GPS tracking you're going to get. Here we do have some deviation. And here one signal is actually quite a bit further away from the rest. Still, I don't think I've really seen better performance than this. And here the signals are again super consistent. So overall, about what we would expect from Garmin, just really solid and good GPS tracking performance. Okay, so that was a lot of data, but what is my overall conclusion on the Garmin Forerunner 970? Well, it depends a bit on how much money you have to spend. Wait, let me sit down for a second and I'll explain.
Whoa. Mother trucker, dude. That hurt like a butt cheek on a stick.
So as I was saying, it depends a bit on how much money you have to spend. I honestly really enjoyed using the Garmin Forerunner 970. It's one of my favorite watches in terms of user experience and also in terms of the way I want to use it. The two things that are really missing for me are good sleep tracking and a slightly better app for data interpretation. So because I'm also interested in the health aspect of things, I still use a Whoop strap because that's sort of an overall good performer, but it's not quite as good as the Garmin 970 in other respects. Like for instance GPS tracking, you need your phone with you, or also the general experience of connecting different devices like an external heart rate monitor, a smart trainer, all the things I use when I go bike riding. I was actually discussing this with Rafael the other day. He's the colleague that tests many devices for me. Over time, he's probably tested 20 to 25 different devices. And his favorite brand in terms of user interface and usability is actually Garmin. He was so happy when he got the Garmin 970 for testing, and he actually commented to me that he really enjoyed using it and it was for him one of the better experiences just in terms of usability. And I have to agree with him, Garmin devices are just solid, you know what you get, and they're just nice to use. They feel mostly premium, at least that's true for many devices, and definitely for the Garmin Forerunner 970. However, is it worth the price? I bought it I think for about 750, 800 euros, which isn't cheap. It's similarly priced in dollars, so around that $700-800 mark. And you can get a Garmin Forerunner 570 for a lot less, so 500 to 600 euros. And the general experience is basically the same for me. I'll actually do a full review of the Garmin Forerunner 570 in a couple of weeks, so we can actually see if the performance is the same. But assuming that the performance is the same, the user experience of both devices and most of their functionalities are the same. Yes, we have a flashlight on the Garmin Forerunner 970 and I use that quite a bit actually when camping, but also at night sometimes when I don't want to turn on all the lights. It's just easy to have it on there. But do you really need it, and is it worth a couple of €100 extra? Well, probably not. As we saw in my testing, older generation watches like the Garmin Forerunner 965 perform about the same as the 970, and even a much cheaper device like the 165 does about as well. Now you cannot connect all devices to the 165. I think you cannot connect a smart trainer for instance, so that's sort of software locked by Garmin. So objectively for me, the heart rate tracking data and the GPS tracking would be good enough. The sleep stage tracking probably not, and subjectively I just really enjoyed using the 970. So if I were to own it, I would be really happy with it. The downside here is that it's just quite expensive. So if I didn't own it yet, I don't think I would get the 970. I would probably get the 570 or even the 165. And you would spend a lot less money having a more or less similar experience. Yes, you do lose some features going down the line in Garmin watches. But for me, as a generally quite sporty person who does a lot of cycling, running, indoor cycling, the Garmin 570 would already be good enough. And spending the extra money on the 970 would just be indulging myself. It would be sort of a treat to myself if I have the money to spend, but it definitely isn't necessary. Just like many people might buy an Apple Watch Ultra, even though an Apple Watch SE would probably be good enough for them. It's just that feeling, that sort of treating yourself and just knowing that you have one of the more premium devices. Just be conscious if your budget is more tight that you're not missing out that much. And I would say as you get up the line from the 165 to the 570 to the 970, there's diminishing returns in upgrading. Now these are the data and my personal experience. One thing I did want to note is I got the white version for the 970 and the black version for the 570, and even though I actually slightly prefer the black version of the 570, scratches just show up much more easily. I can already see some damage all around the bezel of the watch, and somehow the white version with this metallic colored bezel shows those scratches much less clearly. So in terms of durability of the looks, I think the white version is slightly preferred over the black version, and I might actually now get the white version of these watches if I had a choice. So these are my conclusions, mostly based on objective data, so I hope it was helpful. I actually spent a lot of money on Garmin devices recently. I bought the Venue X1, the 570, the 970, and Garmin lent me one device, which is the one Raphael's testing. So one way to support the channel financially if you do end up getting a device is to use one of the affiliate links down below, whether it be a 970, 570, Venue X1, an 8 sleep pulse, an Aura ring, a Whoop strap, another device, or anything at all on Amazon for that matter, even something as small as toilet paper. Those are linked below. Now, given that you watched this whole video on the Garmin Forerunner 970, check out this video on the best sleep stage trackers or this video on the new Whoop strap.